So I've been trying to figure out what to do or how to do this intro, and I've given up. I'm just going to show off. I mean, I'm English, I'm not used to the heat, I don't like the tropics, I'm dying out here. But I'm in El Salvador, and as you can see, hell on earth, I'm not doing too well. But why would you come here? Now for me, I had a particular interest in this place because in the news, they said that this is now a Bitcoin state, which means that Bitcoin is legal tender. Now for people who don't know, Bitcoin, it's a digital currency. Because of course you can have anything as currency. We got dollars, pounds. In Zimbabwe, $50 million. It's fantastic, everyone's a millionaire, but it's bloody worthless. Or you could go to a failed state like the Soviet Union and get yourself literally a wad of cash. But again, it becomes worthless because it's literally pieces of paper. I mean, hell, even in Fallout, you know, you could use bottle caps. It's worth more, it's worth a piece of metal, I guess, but still nothing. So El Salvador uses US dollars as their currency, which means that they're beholden to the US, to how much they're going to print, how much they're going to inflate the currency. So a get out was, what if we make Bitcoin legal tender? And then businesses here have to accept it. And then all of a sudden, we've got our own currency and no one can control it, no banking institution whatsoever. So, let's go and see how true that is. And see whether or not the truth is also that this place is now paradise on earth. I want to die, it's too hot. I want to go home. If you've heard of El Salvador at all, you probably know it from one of two places. Either you've been watching Geography Now for almost a decade, or you've heard about it from the online obsessions. And online, it's famous for two things: the adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender, and the extermination of violent crime, which is why El Salvador's gone from the most violent country during peacetime to now a country that's safer than Luxembourg when it comes to the homicide rate. Presumably you're a guy who also doesn't like being murdered, in which case you might be interested how they did it, and whether or not it's a thing you could implement in your country. Which is why the story in English goes a little something like this. There was once upon a time in El Salvador riddled with corruption, ruled by dictators during a civil war with socialist guerrillas, until eventually a peace was brokered and those socialists came to power, and the country became a gang-run state. Until a handsome tech bro prince came along named Nayib Bukele. Bukele left the Socialist Party and started his own party called New Ideas. He then ran for election, won, and deployed the military and police to destroy the gangs and the gang states, and now the people live in peace and prosperity. It turns out Bukele had discovered this technology known as prisons, and if you put people in the prisons, it turns out that they can't be on the streets murdering and robbing civilians. Instead, they're locked behind bars. Truly an incredible technology, which had seemingly been forgotten from many Anglo-Saxon countries, most starkly from California in the United States, which found out that legalizing crime led to more crime. This is weird, I know. Bukele is very proud of this achievement, and that's why he holds these rallies in which he has the military and police stand by to show the focus on law and order, and also why, when rumors were circulating that there were criminals in a place called Apopa, he decided to deploy 2,000 military personnel and 1,000 police officers to the town to besiege the place until they found the criminals they were looking for. Bukele is also a very interesting leader. He's been gloating on Twitter that he knows how to solve California's crime problem with one easy trick, but he's also been described as the world's coolest dictator and the world's most successful dictator. He also has his own coffee brand's sponsorship. No Raid Shadow Legends as of yet. And those prisons I spoke about, well, they're brand new, so he likes to show them off online. So he even has YouTubers show up to show off how brutal they are being towards the prisoners.
Now when an inmate walks into this door, he never leaves. Here are some of the most dangerous people in the world. You can see they have their tattoos. MS-13 is tattooed on their foreheads. Barrio 18. All these guys were once prideful and running the streets of El Salvador. Now they are locked behind bars for the rest of their life. And these are the rooms of solitary confinement. If a prisoner were to act up, he'd be sent into one of these rooms here. Here they have their bathroom, they get some water, and the only sort of light they have is this little peephole right up here, and they get absolutely nothing to use to sleep or to rest.
Naturally, this whole thing has captured the Anglosphere's attention, with the left and the right wing being very interested, the left wing complaining about democracy and human rights, and the right wing taking the piss out of them. Bukele is also known for bringing Bitcoin to be legal tender in the country. Now, it's not that complicated, don't worry about it. Just think of it as a digital currency, because it's basically what it is for everyday purposes. As opposed to bits of paper with people's faces on, you just said a digital amount. And the reason this is of interest is because El Salvador used to have its own currency, and then got rid of it to run on the US dollar in the 2000s, and then very quickly discovered there's a bit of a problem with that, which is what if the United States decides to print literally trillions and trillions of dollars, and now you have massive inflation, and there's nothing you can do about it, because it's not your currency, it's the United States'. So this was a way of digging themselves out of that problem. So a man named Alejandro came to Bukele and offered this as a solution, and it was adopted, meaning it's the first country on earth where you can use Bitcoin to buy and sell stuff on a day-to-day basis, and it has to be accepted. It's legal tender. If you want to pay and settle your bills that way, you can. This is something many Bitcoiners have absolutely loved and flocked to El Salvador to see the future being made. And I wanted to go see if the future was being made as well. So I started out in Miami. Now, Miami is a Hispanic city. There was one guy there who described it as the Hispanic Mecca, although it's also home to many Bitcoiners, so it was the perfect starting point to go and figure out how the hell Bitcoin works before I go into the country. Although it is really bloody expensive, so naturally I booked the cheapest place I could find, and, well, it came with roommates, mostly cockroaches. Why do you have to exist? Don't you just love it when your hotel comes with free activities, such as roach patrol? Get to patrol your own roaches. So cool. For a point of comparison, that place cost me the same as a 5-star hotel in Moscow. And this place came with people's belongings just sitting out in the street, pigeons in the local Starbucks, and also just in general, Miami is a very interesting place, let's put it that way. It's also a place that has an immense amount of wealth. You can see this in some of the things they have there. For example, there is an island called Fisher Island, which has an average house price of about $6 million US, and part of the reason being that it's so exclusive, it has its own private ferry that you have to board to get to and from the island, to keep out the riffraff. So the first thing I did was met up with a guy called Benjamin Dictor.
I'm Benjamin Dictor. I was one of the leaders, the spokesperson and the media strategist for the Canadian Trucker Convoy, which I talk about in this book, Honking for Freedom.
Now for those who don't know, Benjamin was a spokesman for the Canadian truckers protest, which if you weren't familiar with, they were a huge thing during COVID in which Canadian truckers were fighting against vaccine mandates for driving across border. Now, a whole other conversation, but what's interesting is this was huge and was a fight with the Canadian government. So naturally, when it exploded, this was going to come to a head, and it did, in the fact that the Canadian government desperately wanted to shut down what was going on. So they instituted the Emergency Act and used it to freeze the bank accounts of the truckers and those organizing the protests. Now this is the sort of thing you usually keep for terrorists or enemies of the state, and all of a sudden, these guys realized that the money they have in the bank was not theirs. It's up to the bank and the state to decide whether or not that money really is yours.
The Canadian government took the unprecedented move of freezing our bank accounts, our credit cards, our credit lines, our business accounts, absolutely every means we had to transact in the modern world, meaning we couldn't even get food. The one thing we had, or at least I had, was Bitcoin. I had been in Bitcoin for many years prior, and of the $25 million cumulatively that was raised in 3 weeks for the protesters, the approximately $1.2 million in Bitcoin at that time was the only money that got into the hands of truckers. The rest of the donations were frozen either by injunction or by means of pressure from the government on GoFundMe and GiveSendGo, and therefore none of that money got into the hands of truckers. And the only money that was actually transferred out of the crowdfunding platforms is now in escrow pending a lawsuit, a reverse class action lawsuit of people with ties to the Trudeau government. And that is when I came out as a strong advocate for Bitcoin, as I call it the Freedom Protocol. It's the one money that governments cannot seize and cannot take from you.
So they started handing out Bitcoin wallets with about 8,000 US dollars on to the individual truckers to pay for their expenses.
Hey man, how's it going? Yeah, go ahead, you're good.
I'm gonna give this to you.
Oh, nice.
Remember how I came and gave you some sats?
Yep.
There's $8,000 of Bitcoin in there.
Oh, in here?
In there. As soon as the bank shut down, we had some big donors that were like, we need to get Bitcoin to these truckers. I'm not kidding you. So keep it safe.
God.
Boot it up. It's yours.
Fuck,
Thanks for your service.
That's insane, man. That's ridiculous.
To get a copy of Honking for Freedom, you can go to honkingforfreedom.com and get it anywhere in the world, both digitally or in paperback. It doesn't matter if you're interested in finance or not, if you understand fiat currency or central banking or not. This is something that is of vital importance to all of us.
Might seem like a bit of a niche use for a digital currency, right? I mean, how many massive protests taking down the national government is the average guy organizing? But then again, the whole thing did awaken a lot of people to the fact that that money you've got in the bank, it's not really yours. It's a promise that they'll give it to you one day, we swearsies, because the bank and the state also have to agree that you should have access to it. Which is terrifying. It also alludes to the source of Bitcoin, which is in response to the 2008 financial crisis. All the corruption that was going on within the banks caused a guy to organize the Bitcoin network, and, well, now it exists as a currency, completely decentralized, not in the control of any one person. And that's how you get people in the Bitcoin world that come from, the left-wing Occupy Wall Street kind of politics, and also from the, let's say, more right-wing anti-COVID measures kind of politics. And, well, we could now try and get into what Bitcoin is and dig real deep, but the thing is, it's a massive rabbit hole that could go on forever, and so it's not really that necessary. What's important is just that it's a digital currency that's not in the control of any major system. Instead, it's completely decentralized. Because the main question for a normal person is, what can Bitcoin do for me, rather than, some weird niche uses? And that's the thing. Bitcoin is just another currency. It's not particularly special in any aspect. It's a currency that's digital, so you can send it immediately from one person to the other. But then again, basically a bank card does that these days. But what's unique is that it's decentralized. It's not controlled by the banks. It's not controlled by the government. So no one can actually tell you how to spend your money. It's completely up to you. I mean, for example, when I was on this trip, I would constantly get phone calls from my bank being like, with a fraud team, we've frozen your account, I'm sorry, but someone has spent £1.99 on an ice cream. We think it could be fraud. So I'd have to constantly call up my bank and be like, can you unfreeze my card? You've frozen my card again for buying an ice cream. I'm just trying to live my life. And now, well, no one can tell me how to spend my money. It's literally up to me. Let's say, for example, you wanted to, for God knows what reason, you'd flee your country, such as the United Kingdom. You'd only be able to take 10,000 US dollars in cash with you through customs. Anything else they would just seize, because that's the law. Same for gold. But if you were transferring Bitcoin, well, guess what? They can't track it. And there's no way of stopping you. Which is pretty neat. Also, the transfer fees are way less than the banking system if you were transferring large amounts of money, but if you're sending small amounts, you can send it on what's called Lightning, so the transfer fee is basically zero. Not to mention, there's a limited amount of it, so you're never going to experience the levels of hyperinflation that, Zimbabwe dollars experience, for example. So on paper, it's way better than normal cash. So I sat down with Benjamin and had him explain to me how the hell I get some.
So what we're going to do, Callum, is we're going to give you your first Bitcoin. So this is Moon. Go in, and then I can receive or send, so we want to receive.
You can use Bitcoin, which is the layer 1 you were talking about.
Yes.
Takes a while, but if you want to do very fast market transaction, this is Lightning.
And the fee rate is significant. It's like a fractions of a penny when you use Lightning, and it's instantaneous.
Okay.
Whereas on-chain, it's for larger transactions, but the transaction fees are higher, and it's because you wait for more verifications.
Right.
It's more technical than that, so Bitcoiners, don't yell at me. I'm trying to orange pill people who are new to Bitcoin. Okay. All right, so what you're gonna do is you're gonna click your invoice settings.
Add an amount.
Yeah, so put $20.
I want to buy $20.
Well, no, buy, I'm gonna send it to you.
Oh, gonna get $20, yeah. So that's... that's the last part.
19,000 Satoshis, approximately.
Okay, so this is now requesting $20.
That's right.
This QR code.
So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click send, and I'm gonna get, it's gonna ask me to scan the QR code, which is what I'm gonna do right now. And write a note. Hi, Callum. Confirm note. Send. Okay. And there you go. Just flickered. Something just happened.
I now have $20.
That is directly from you and I through
Pleasure doing business with you.
through the Bitcoin protocol. No bank, no government, no intermediary, no counterparty risk. It's directly between you and I, and it's being verified. It's on-chain, but it's different, but essentially the blockchain will verify it. Okay?
Okay.
There you go.
And now I've got this basically in a digital wallet, and I can send that to someone. So if they have goods instead, so this essentially is the good, I can buy whatever I want.
That's right. And we are learning things. And hopefully we go to El Salvador, you'll be able to use that wallet and go to wherever you want to go to and pay for your item with your Moon
I can
wallet.
buy my McDonald's.
That's right.
I can buy $20 of chicken nuggets. For simplicity's sake, one Bitcoin equaled about 100,000 US dollars at the time we were buying it. And Bitcoins are made up of 1 million sats. So the exchange rate was about 1,000 sats to a US dollar. If the word sats is confusing you, it's basically cents for a Bitcoin. Put it that way. Easy to understand. And there's a lot more uses for Bitcoin than the ones I'm bringing up. Those are just ones that come to my mind. I mean, for example, if you want to buy something from a country which is sanctioned, such as Russia. If you weren't buying anything illegal, just buying t-shirts or whatever, but now your card doesn't work over there, hey, just send the Bitcoin, get it transferred that way. Literally nothing the West can do about it, nothing the banking system can do about it. But there's loads more than, unique traveling merchant problems. So I went and sat down with a guy who runs a YouTube channel called Simply Bitcoin to ask him what this was all about.
My name is Nico Moran. I'm the host and founder of Simply Bitcoin. We're a Bitcoin-only media-focused company, and I dedicate my life to guiding individuals through the separation of money and state using Bitcoin. Governments have always enjoyed their monopoly on money and their ability to create money out of thin air that everyone else has to work for. When Bitcoin first came in the scene, it was WikiLeaks, it was Julian Assange that was using Bitcoin in order to raise money for WikiLeaks because the credit card companies cut him off. And of course, governments dislike that. In fact, if they had the ability to ban it, they would have banned it by now. But because of Bitcoin's decentralization, they couldn't make it go away. And because of Bitcoin's superior incentives to fiat money, over time, what's happened is that more and more of the populace has adopted it. It's just attracted people. It's attracted, originally it was the cypherpunks. Originally it was kind of like the libertarians, the anarcho-capitalists that just didn't like government. But over time, Wall Street couldn't resist it. And now what is starting to happen is nation state adoption. We are now living through a type of revolution, which is the separation of information and state, money and state, and there's going to be unintended consequences. What I predict a lot of these unintended consequences are going to be is I think there's going to be a dramatic rise in wealth inequality due to the ability the government is not going to have the ability to effectively redistribute wealth the way they have been due to their loss on the control of money. Now, the government redistributes wealth through two mechanisms: direct taxation and taxation via monetary debasement, also known as inflation. You take that away from them and they can't redistribute wealth the way they used to. So what I believe what we're gonna see is a dramatic increase in wealth inequality. And I think that there is going to be violence that comes with that. If you look at history, that tends to happen with increases in wealth inequality. Every time a central bank prints money, it's wealth redistribution from the lower and middle classes that don't have the means to save in assets. They save in fiat, and it's a redistribution to the very wealthy and a redistribution back to the government, right? So that system, I think, is corrupt. That system, I think, is bad. I think that system, the majority of us are impacted by that system, but there's some people that benefit from that said system, and I think those people aren't exactly gonna be thrilled when the government can no longer afford to pay their salaries.
Needless to say, the Bitcoin conversation could go on literally forever, and people do. So if you want to go and find out a million things more, you can, and just go over to Simply Bitcoin and they'll have a million conversations to have about this. But for the average person, I mean, it don't matter that much. All we need to understand is it's just another currency that we can use that has some benefits. It also has some downsides. For example, the constant fluctuating exchange rate can leave you a little, hung out to dry if you're holding for a long time and it goes down a bunch and then you try and sell it. But for us as tourists, not really a major issue. So I organized a flight to El Salvador. They then tried to charge me over $1,000 for bringing on a checked-in bag, which, nope, no, I'll just leave it behind. Never mind, I'll just buy my own clothes, I guess. And then got to El Salvador, at which point we were greeted with the smiling faces of El Presidente and his wife. Upon arrival, first worlders have to pay a $13 tourism tax. So we were segregated off. Benjamin, being Canadian, went one way, and me being British went another. And I found out that you could pay this tourism tax in Bitcoin. So I was really excited to film it and show off that you could, pay your taxes with Bitcoin. But when I got to the border, the guy looked at my British passport and then just told me to go through. Told me not to pay the tax. So I guess being British, we're now third world bros. Not sure how to feel about that, but no tax. Also, the airport is quite a drive from the capital where we were staying, so I had to organize a taxi, which is where we met a local man called Nap. Now, he runs BitDriver, which is a Bitcoin taxi service. So we got in the car and headed to our location by paying with Bitcoin. So you are going to make a request for 35,000.
35,000. Confirm? Yeah? It's easy.
Holy fucking shit.
Yeah.
That is
easy.
amazing.
Yeah, it's easy. Yeah? It's Bitcoin.
It's fucking brilliant, man.
Okay, thank you guys.
You can also rent cars from him using Bitcoin, which really does get into your head upon arrival that this is a currency that's in use. It's not just a meme. The highway is also lit with El Salvadorian lights, so this gave us a perfect opportunity to sit and chat about the country in general.
Cuando Bitcoin comenzó a ser moneda de curso legal en El Salvador, yo tomé la decisión de aceptar Bitcoin y fue como inicié todo este negocio de BitDriver. Que BitDriver es la primera compañía en El Salvador en conductores privados y renta de carros en aceptar Bitcoin en El Salvador.
So what do you do with all this Bitcoin you make?
Ok, lo que yo hago es que yo el 100% de los pagos es Bitcoin. El 100%. 65% yo tengo que cambiarlo, transformarlo en dólares o pagar el colegio de mis hijos, pagar la gasolina, pagar otros productos. Y el otro 35% va guardado, va holding el otro 35%.
So you're still not using Bitcoin to pay off most of your expenses?
Yo prefiero pagar en Bitcoin. Yo tengo los lugares como la gasolinera, el supermercado. Yo ya tengo los lugares donde aceptan pagos en Bitcoin. Pero esto es un proceso, Estamos hablando de un país que nunca había escuchado de la tecnología, ni mucho menos de Bitcoin. Yo creo que dentro de los próximos 10 años, la mayoría de gente va a aceptar Bitcoin aquí en el país. Pasamos de ser el país más violento del mundo, con 15 homicidios o asesinatos diarios, a tener 0 asesinatos casi en 3 años. La realidad del salvadoreño ahora es que vivimos más tranquilo, vivimos más en paz. Ahora, ya se resolvió el problema de la delincuencia, que es el principal. Ahora vamos por otro de los problemas, la economía. La política anteriormente fue lo que nos destruyó como país. Los 2 partidos políticos que existían aquí en el país, de izquierda, el FMLN, y de derecha, Arena, destruyeron el país. O sea, nos destruyeron a nosotros como población, nos destruyeron a nosotros con nuestras familias. La familia quería irse del país, no quería permanecer aquí por los niveles de violencia. Ahora, la parte política, creo que al 80% de los salvadoreños no nos interesa, siempre y cuando tengamos seguridad. O sea, yo el precio de la libertad que yo tengo ahora, el precio de que mi vida ha cambiado, porque mi vida cambió, ahora yo estoy dispuesto a defenderlo. Y eso, si es el presidente Bukele, si es el hermano del presidente, si es otra persona, siempre de la misma, no me importa, siempre y cuando yo viva en paz. Si yo vivo en paz y puedo hacer mi trabajo tranquilamente, no me importa, la verdad, la política. Yo fui a Los Ángeles hace 6 meses y vi Los Ángeles y solo recordé al viejo El Salvador, al centro histórico El Salvador, hace 6 años atrás. Ver la basura, ver a homeless en la calle, era en Estados Unidos.
The next day, it was time to head into the capital and see what the country had to offer. Here's a little trash squirrel. I'm not going to steal your trash, don't worry.
Speak to them in Spanish.
No, all squirrels are English. They speak English.
Pídame el brócoli, mamita, pídame el brócoli del verdecito, pídame el brócoli del fresquecito, pídame la coliflor, mamita, pídame la coliflor, pídame la coliflor, pídame.
So I want to show you something. Now, I'm in a men's toilet in a tourist location as well. So here's a toilet, not in the best condition, but whatever, right? Not very different, toilet paper, yeah. The bin. I really don't want to do this, but in the spirit of adventuring, let's see what's in the bin. Yeah, that is fucking vile. Okay. So in this country, as I discussed in a podcast I made with Miles, like most of the world, didn't know this was a thing until you find out, they don't flush the toilet paper. So you wipe, and you put it in the bin. So there's just a bin full of human waste next to where you're having to, and then you've got to open it and put your stuff in. And the smell there, and still now, is not fantastic. The toilet bin, the dreaded toilet bin, it's a thing. So this is El Salvador, and this isn't how an average person lives, obviously, but I wanted to get somewhere that wasn't full of cockroaches. So we booked this place, 3-bedroom, beautifully modern. Comes with bedroom and then the closet room, of course, for women. And then here is the shower room, which again, very nice. Very good stuff. And the thing is, this is cheaper than the cockroach-infested hotel back in Miami. I can see why, if you're an American, you just think, why not just go down to Latin America and live there? Because, again, it's not that it's cheap here and it's expensive in the US. It's overpriced in the US. Like, that is ridiculous. The fact that this place, that is unbelievably nice, air conditioning, everything's new. If you work remote, why the hell would you live in Miami? Why the hell would you pay? What you get in Miami for your money is cockroaches. What you get in El Salvador for your money is top 1% in the society. but just generally, like, this is fantastic. This is much better than most houses in the UK. There's a lot of stuff we don't have in the UK that I'm discovering Americans have, and my God, the wealth differences are not small. One downside so far we've discovered though, which is that El Salvadorians do not like to shower in hot water because it's bloody boiling here, which is understandable. Apparently all of Central America is like this, and South America, so you just have cold water. It was rumored that there was hot water here because it's a modern place. Sadly not. What's really weird about that is you go into the shower, like here it is, and there I don't know if you can see it, but it says cold, and it says hot, but there is no cold or hot. There is cold and slightly less cold. I'm a big fan of the slightly less cold. That's much better than the cold. Now, first things first, breakfast. So, there are Salvadorian-style breakfasts which you can get, which are very nice, do include beans, much approved from the British. But there also is a national food, and the national food are pupusas, which are essentially these kind of pancake things covered in cheese that are savory, that are pretty good. So we decided to walk through some broken streets and look at all the Christmas decorations in the country of barbed wire and shards of broken glass to keep your house safe. Hey, I don't smell human shit, so it's better than Afghanistan. Yeah, well. Because you were saying we've got to take our shoes off because of what we walk in, and I was like, oh, I don't know, dirt. Nah, not dirt. And ended up at a pretty average breakfast place and got some pupusas, which you eat with your hands. Oh, not bad. Nothing wrong with that.
They're
not integrating. Dirty foreigner. But I suppose if you clean your hands, I mean, I guess, but I'm just looking at that just instinctively, I'm like, you know what, Benjamin's got a good point.
We use a proper knife and fork.
Yeah, but then you're a dirty foreigner not integrating. You need to cover your hand in sauce. You need to spice your hand. Sadly, Bitcoin was not accepted here. So I organised an Uber, and we met Nancy, a local lady who was lovely and agreed to drive us around. First stop was a mall to go and get SIM cards, so our phones would actually work. And here I did discover that yes, you can find a lot more places that accept Bitcoin. Such as if you go to Starbucks, you can indeed get your white woman cake pops and pay for them using Bitcoin. I then headed over to McDonald's to buy some chicken nuggies and see if you could buy those. And so we went up to the McDonald's counter, ordered the chicken nuggets, and then asked to pay in Bitcoin, at which point the smiles from the ladies behind the desk sort of went away, as they then had to go and get the iPad and bring it out, and my friends had to explain how to actually pay with Bitcoin. They'd obviously been taught how to do it, but it's so rare or not common enough that it's kind of just a pain in the ass for the staff. At least that seems how they approach the subject, which is like, another thing I've got to deal with, which, understandable. So it was a bit of a pain, but you can actually buy your stuff with Bitcoin and get your chicken nuggies and taste them. Dem's nuggies.
They're Bitcoin nuggets.
At which point I decided to go around the food court and ask all the different vendors whether or not they accepted Bitcoin. ¿Aceptan Bitcoin o no? Sí. ¿Sí? Hola. ¿Aceptan Bitcoin o no?
Sí.
Sí.
¿Aceptan Bitcoin aquí o no? ¿Aceptan Bitcoin?
No. Okay. ¿Aceptar Bitcoin aquí o no? No. Okay. ¿Aceptar Bitcoin aquí o no? No. So some Western chains, yes. Local chains, not really.
But you notice something? The ones who said yes are all younger.
That's true. So what was the count? We did Western brands, mostly yes, except Bitcoin. El Salvadorian brands of fast food, it was basically a no.
That's right. It was no and get out of here.
Driving around the town, we did start to notice the level of commercialization in El Salvador is ridiculous. I mean, maybe this is from an English perspective, but you look anywhere and there's just a million billboards advertising a million things, which, okay, I guess. At which point we decided to go to a local market to see how an average person actually shops, not at the fancy malls. You can buy turkeys. Okay. Bye-bye. But arriving at the market, that classic third world smell, which is the only way I can describe it, began to reappear. For those who have travelled to these places, you'll know, the rotting food, the car fumes, and the dirt all mixed together. I mean, someone really ought to make a candle out of it. But you go into the market and you will discover as to why. The stalls outside are built out of shacks, and the inside of the market is a dense maze of food sitting in humid heat and goods, with local cats hunting what they can. Aquí.
That's pest control.
That's pest control.
Yeah.
The market also has an armed police presence, and in places like this, I might be more worried usually about walking around with a camera, but here, the thought didn't even enter my head that someone would steal it. I mean, when you're dealing with a situation where everyone who is massively violent or criminal has been dealt with, and everyone else knows what will happen to them if they do that sort of thing, and there are police about, I gotta be honest, never really felt safer. In fact, we managed to run into a local lady who was born and raised in El Salvador, but then moved to the United States to get away from the problems, and had since come back to help her family and discovered how much things had changed.
The gangas, they take the boys, and then you doesn't know. You doesn't see anymore your boys, your sons, your family. Very dangerous.
They would come and steal young boys?
Yeah. They use the car because they take the cars and then they rabbit him and then you never see them.
Okay. Whereas now...
Now, no.
Nothing.
Now you can see a lot of kids around. Is nothing happen. Before you can. The kids is everybody in the houses because they can't go outside in the street.
So where did you live in the United States?
California, Orange Country.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wonder, when you think about the United States now versus El Salvador, what do you think? You prefer El Salvador?
Here.
Okay.
Because now over there is more danger.
It's more dangerous in California than El Salvador?
California, yeah.
Okay.
Especially in Los Angeles. It's like here before.
One thing she didn't want to mention on camera was about the situation before with what are called loan sharks, which apparently was very brutal. I couldn't tell you how brutal, but she told us how things used to be with the gangs, just with paying the rent money, which would be that the guy would come round, he would insist on the $5 payment per day that you had to pay them for your stall, and if you couldn't pay them that day because you hadn't sold anything, it's just how business goes sometimes, there wasn't any, well, pay us back tomorrow, but there's 1,000,000,000% interest and, we'll fleece you or whatever. No, they would just grab you by your hair, pull you out into the stalls in front of everyone, and shoot you in the back of the head. And that was that. So coming back and seeing that that's just gone, that gives her a sense of change which is profound. I mean, a real sense of freedom from crime, something which you can tell talking to people they deeply cherish. We also hit up an artisan market which sold all sorts of, locally made goods and souvenirs, that sort of thing. And what was interesting is here you can start to see some of that Bukele fever. They even had a little cardboard cutout of the guy just sitting there. But in some of the market stalls you will find Bukele-themed items, such as Bukele aprons, for your little waifu to wear, while she makes you pupusas. There was also, of course, the I Love Bukele bracelets, because why wouldn't you? And also the general military patches of the units that put down the gangs, as well as flags and other things, which are all Bukele-themed, including, well, just Bukele's face on a piece of wood. Because why wouldn't you want that in your house? And I will be selling some of these items, and I will be accepting Bitcoin payments for the El Salvadorian stuff, just to see how that goes, give it a try, and hopefully it all works out. And for those who don't know, the reason I'm doing that is because that's how I pay for all this, is through buying things in country, selling them, but also mostly through the support that people give me on Subscribestar. And if you sign up on Subscribestar to give me financial support to make these things happen, I'll still send you some rubles from the Soviet Union, and if I've got any Zimbabwe dollars left, I'll throw those in as well. So thank you to everyone who already does. I've also got a more normal YouTuber merch store than the schizo stuff I find in country for people who want to just buy something normally that they might like from Teespring. But, if you like the schizo stuff, that's fun as well. One of the funny things is that at the artisan market, I did also find out that Hispanics have a different sense of humor than we do for some things, as the lady running a small store was adamant that she had to show me something. Okay. Anyway, speaking of Bukele, you will also find a Bukele-themed restaurant in the center of the city in the historical center, which, of course, serves the national food, pupusas. Now, the historical center is the place you'll find the most beautiful buildings, and is, frankly, more first world in quality than a lot of places these days in the supposed first world as you walk around. And the reason for this is, it was explained to me later, this was not always the case. In fact, in the before times, these places were very crammed and dirty and full of crime as a lot of other places. In fact, if you want to see the difference between these small, quaint Christmas markets that have been set up that look like something out of a first world country and what used to be, all you have to do is walk over a few streets, at which point you will see the crammed nature of the streets there and the, well, traffic causing an immense amount of noise and air pollution. That lovely smell again. So this is how it used to be, loud, people speaking prices and, you know, a bit more filthy. And now it's been turned into a white woman heaven in the center. And I guess that's what's going to happen to the rest of the country. Well, depends which one you like, I suppose, but people seem to like the one without crime. There's Stars of David opposite the mosque. In fact, what was really cute is seeing the Christmas markets and then being told before, you would not have dreamed to be out as late as we were, which was only 5 p.m, to see this stuff because of the level of crime. Whereas now you see these families out in absolute no fear with their children. And this isn't to say this isn't the only place that you can find beauty in the capital. There are plenty of other places of beautification all around the capital, which are very nice. And the last thing to do for that day was to stop off at a supermarket and get some supplies, and have the Tucker Carlson experience. Just doing the Tucker Carlson thing of looking at a supermarket and going, wow, a supermarket. They have stuff? Of course they got coffee, it's Central America. Bloody hell, how much? I thought the coffee was going to be pennies. Look, one of the small pile of M&Ms, £5. In El Salvador, frankly, the food is not very cheap, especially considering the wages. Russia had a far better deal, from what I can see, of countries like this. And what was strange is the food you can get in country isn't particularly fantastic, either. I mean, the candy we got, we'd open up, and then quite often it would be moldy, because it'd been sitting there so long. And the steak in this country, and meat in general, didn't taste right. Don't really know how to explain that, but just wrong. Also, the supermarket we were at, called Super Selectos, we tried to pay with Bitcoin, because apparently they do accept it. Although the older member of staff running that particular checkout said they didn't accept it. When a younger member of staff came in to explain, yes they do, and here's how to do it, the older member of staff was not having it. Clearly it seems that it's not considered ideal, or maybe there's a bit of a learning curve in getting that in place. The next day we headed to the coast to go and see the heart of the Bitcoin revolution at a place called Bitcoin Beach. But we stopped off first in a place called La Libertad, which was 30 degrees centigrade with the humidity of the tropics. So after putting on sunscreen, I died.
You are every meme Latinos have about white people.
What do you mean? Am I standing out or something? I need more sunscreen. Look at it though. Look at what that's done to my arm. I don't know if you can zoom in on that, but like, my arm is mixed with the sunscreen to make this kind of slide.
Well, you know, you put like 5 gallons of sunscreen on. That's the problem. It's not the way it works.
Yeah, but it's pretty bloody sunny. Anyway, let me enjoy my pile of insects.
Wow.
How you feeling, BJ?
It's amazing. I'm feeling calm and cool, and there's a little bit of a breeze, and I don't know. I couldn't be more comfortable. The polar.
I want to die.
You get used to it over time. You spend enough time in a beach place, you know.
I want to explain, this isn't for YouTube either, like I was just asking him. This is gonna get TMI. Every crevice is currently sweating because my body doesn't know what to do. It's horrible. Oh, it's fucking hot, help me out. From here, it was a short drive to what is called Bitcoin Beach. Now, the story goes that basically a surfer dude wanted to find the best place on Earth to go surfing, and my boy, he found it. I mean, this place looks like something out of a postcard with its black sand beaches. Once he discovered it, he wanted to build it up and transfer his wealth there, and realized Bitcoin was the easiest way to do that. And when the country adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, not only did this place attract a lot of people, including surfers and Bitcoiners like that, they also became a place of government interest because the government wanted to see this place grow with outside investment coming in from Bitcoin. Now, coming from the surfer community, of course, the posters you will find around in Bitcoin Beach are a little bit more utopian, but down here it does seem to have taken hold. Apparently you can pay all of your bills in Bitcoin down here. In fact, we went to a local place which is known as the Bitcoin Market, which opens on the weekend. Sadly, we weren't in town for when it was open, but there was a little convenience store. So we went in and chatted to the lady who ran the place. And she told us not only does she get her salary in Bitcoin, she then pays her rent and goes to the supermarket to buy all their stuff in Bitcoin. And she would not go back to the old system of using fiat currency. But of most interest to me was the Bitcoin hardware store. The guy running it was a Canadian who didn't like the direction of change in Canada, so left for El Salvador and is now a big supporter of the country.
I moved here to El Salvador because, again, like I told you earlier, I was fed up with Canada. When I was there and when COVID was happening, I was watching the news because there's really not much you could do. I couldn't go anywhere. I wasn't vaccinated, so I couldn't go to restaurants, couldn't go to parks. And I was watching the news. And I was comparing what was happening there versus what was happening here, because I have a Salvadoran passport. So for me, it was just the two easiest things that I could compare at the time. And just the moves that the government was making here, to me, seemed better, even with the gangs and everything. Just based off of COVID alone, which was affecting me and the whole world at that time, I knew that this was a better place for me. And I was originally was just gonna stick it out here for like 6 months and then hopefully go back to Canada, and it was gonna be back to normal again, but that normal never happened. And when I got here, so COVID made me leave Canada. I never thought I'd not go back, but it was Bitcoin that actually made me stay.
Now, the Bitcoin hardware store is more of a Library of Alexandria of how Bitcoin works and all that sort of stuff, like explaining what seed phrases are and cold storage and how Bitcoin mining works, and there's screens explaining how Bitcoin mining works. And in fact, they even have a book called the Bitcoin Diploma, which they use to teach the new generation of El Salvador how Bitcoin works. And yeah, you'll get to learn how everything works with the financial system by reading that. And again, for the normal person, you don't really need to know all this stuff. I mean, you can really do a bare minimum and you'll be fine with using it as a currency. You can choose to go down the rabbit hole deeper or not. It's up to you. And what was most of interest to me was not so much all this stuff, although it is interesting. The most interesting thing was the Bitcoin ATMs he had in the store. Now, there was one that's a normal ATM. You put your card in or cash, and you can exchange your currency for a different currency, in this case being Bitcoin. The most interesting for me was the one next to it, in which you can put coins. So you can get your old coins and get rid of them, and in exchange get Bitcoin at a 2% fee.
And then literally... And then you should just be able to show it to the camera here. There we go.
There we go.
There you go. Isn't that brilliant?
Imagine having one of those at every airport on Earth, so you can get rid of the leftover currency that you've got from that place. Get rid of the coins. I mean, that would just be brilliant. I mean, not to mention, El Salvador has this weird situation, because in the United States, you get dollar notes, because they love the notes, and they're brilliant, I gotta admit, they're fantastic. So when the United States government tried to introduce dollar coins, most of America seems to have just completely rejected the idea and doesn't even use them and avoids them at all costs. For some reason, El Salvador got dumped with all the coins. So constantly when you get your change back, you'll be getting these dollar coins, which I do not want weighing me down. So you can just turn them into Bitcoin at the ATM. We ended off the day by going to the Super Selectos near Bitcoin Beach, and over here they had not only accepted Bitcoin as a payment, they even had dedicated lanes showing where to go to spend your Bitcoin instead of US dollars. It definitely seems to be a case that the adoption of it is just learning how it works and getting used to it. The next day, we headed out to see more of average life, because at this point, it was very clear that there were sort of two sections of life. One where they're just sort of getting by, but then again, they'd always been getting by. Now they're just without having to deal with criminals all the time. And also a sort of rich elite, which are the ones you see online mostly. So we headed up to a place called Apopa, which had been quite a troubled place, and still seemingly is treated that way. Because as you drive through the town, you'll notice very large military patrols, as in there's a lot of them all over the place. Now, most other places have police patrols and then armed guards outside of, for example, the supermarket, whereas Apopa is treated more troubled. And apparently that's during the day. At night, apparently it's much stronger. On the flip side, speaking to a local, apparently once upon a time, if you were to walk across the town during nighttime, that was essentially suicide. So if you wanted to off yourself, that was one other option. In fact, when this guy moved to the capital to go to university to study there, he came home one evening and there were just a group of guys hanging outside of his apartment block. They demanded to see his ID, so he got them the university ID, and then demanded to see his apartment, followed him up, and watched as he unlocked the apartment and went inside to prove who he was. Of course, they also took his phone and his wallet. But the whole thing was to prove whether or not he was a rival gang member on their turf. And if he couldn't prove it, they were going to kill him just to make sure, because why wouldn't you? So maybe that gives some context to those military patrols. The next place was Santa Ana, only stopping to see the devastation left by the volcanoes. And for those who don't know, El Salvador is just covered in volcanoes, and, well, it just adds to the sense that the people here have been through living hell in more ways than one. So we're just in a place called Apopa, which apparently is one of the worst. No tourist would ever go there back in the old days. And there'd be no reason to, because why would you? In fact, I was told that there were certain areas, even locals, would just absolutely not. Like, you had to go in with your license, and then your address would determine whether or not you're allowed to enter certain places. So that was that. And we got there, military everywhere. But it used to be so dangerous. I was told a story of a lady who was an outsider. She brought a bus full of people to go and see this specific place. And even though they would, they'd spoken to people, should be able to go, they had to organize like a convoy of security just to keep a small bus of people safe going in and out of there. I mean, what was funny is back in the day, you had to organize life around the gangsters, and now people don't even think about them. In fact, I was told a story, which is that once they cleared out all the gangsters and people got to breathe finally, and they realized how freeing it was to not have to deal with it, they then find the occasional gangster who was hiding, and they tag them on social media, like they put up a picture and tag the police and tag the president and be like, come get him. So yeah, if they exist still, as soon as they get spotted, they get cancelled on social media and sent back to prison. So that's that. Don't know where that guy is, but he's left his bike unlocked, just sitting there. That's a good sign. That's always a good sign. Just come to think of it, it's just weird, right? Like, I'm the murder capital of the world, used to be, and now it's as safe as Finland. It's amazing what you can do when you just, use the budget of the government to actually make things secure. In Santa Ana, you will also find Bukele Mania, with his family being printed on calendars for people to go and buy. It also gave us a nice chance to stop off at Countryside Chicken, which is an El Salvadorian fast food chain. Basically, Los Pollos Hermanos. So the food at Countryside Chicken was pretty decent, to be honest. I mean, it's the second place to pupusas that I ate in the country. Although what was interesting is you get this tiny piece of bread on the side, which didn't really know what to do with, so I just made an English chip butty. When I was back in the United States, apparently this is just a new world thing, that you just get pieces of bread with your meals, which, yeah, it's a good custom. The last stop was a town next to the Guatemalan border with Mayan ruins, which is protected by armed guards, and there are different prices for locals and foreigners. And Bitcoin is accepted here, and only here. Outside of the Mayan ruins, no one seemed to really care for it. And what was interesting is seemingly the Mayan ruins weren't that cared for in the past either. There was a Catholic cemetery built all around the damn thing, presumably only stopping when they realized they should probably take care of it. And that's where a video about El Salvador could end. Bit of tourist scenery, bit of local culture, got to see what's going on. And it's mostly where the story ends in English online. That the country is now crime-free and everything is good. Yeah, that's the story in English. Seemingly, locally, people know there's another side to this. The real history of El Salvador does include the Civil War, the FNLM, the socialists rising to power, and then the crime becoming so bad that Bukele rises to power and does crush them. However, this is not some perfect model, nor do such things happen in a perfect world. Instead, what happened that people seem to leave out is that Bukele enacted what's called the exception regime. This was the exception of civil rights, meaning that the deployment of the army and the military did round up tens of thousands of criminals, but also tens of thousands of just people, with no real checks and balances to see who's innocent and who's not. The courts consisted of hundreds of people in single sittings getting sentenced, with no defense allowed because you don't have civil rights. Now, this did clean up the crime when it's at that level, but it also meant that everyone you speak to, they know someone who's innocent, who's in for just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or a police officer didn't like them, so decided to call them a gangster and got them disappeared. And speaking to the locals, they definitely have a sense of they were once hostages of the gangs, and now they're free of that, but there's a small inkling that they're hostages of the new government, and well aware that no one has any civil rights and is worried that, yeah, they too could just disappear because a police officer doesn't like them. And that's a hell of a thing to live with. Now, the exception regime has been going on for 2 years, and no one's really sure when it's going to end, or even if it will ever end, which is worrying enough. But then there are stories like those of Alejandro, the man I mentioned at the beginning of all this. Now, Alejandro wasn't some opposition figure. He was a friend of Bukele. They used to go paintballing together. And he worked with Bukele as his national security advisor coming to power. After they cleaned up the gangs, Alejandro then decided he was going to go after corruption in general within the government and accused a congressman of drug trafficking. In response, he was arrested and labeled a traitor. He then disappeared into the prison system. His clothes that he was wearing at the time of arrest were handed back to his family, and the family complained that they had his blood on them. And as they tried to ascertain what was going on with him, they couldn't really get through until all of a sudden, he's dead. The cause of death listed as fluid on the lungs. Organs were missing from his body, including a chunk of his brain, and the body was frozen. His death was only announced 3 days after Bukele had been re-elected. Needless to say, Alejandro's family believe he was murdered, and the opposition also believes he was murdered. Now, Alejandro was also a Belgian citizen, so they demanded to find out what happened to him. And shortly after, those who could have been held responsible for his death in custody died in a helicopter crash, which is annoying. I sat down with Alejandro's family to hear their story in country, and they are refusing to leave the country. They're not interested in running away. They've enlisted with the United Nations to find out what happened to him, and the United Nations has demanded the El Salvadorian government explain, and they're awaiting a government response. Now, more than anything, what they wanted was just for people to know that this had happened, because especially in the English language, this sort of thing hasn't been discussed, and naturally it is scared out of a lot of Bitcoiners who, knew Alejandro because he was the guy that brought the whole thing to the attention of the government and thought everything was great. Having their main guy, or a hero in this case, disappear has spooked a lot of them as to what to do. Not to mention it brings up the question of what else are they hiding if this guy was assassinated for merely bringing up a single crime by a member of Congress. Now, when I was in country, I heard a whole range of accusations against Bukele and his government, ranging from he's working with the gangs to make sure the leaders weren't held accountable and they are off scot-free and living in the United States, which is why you keep finding gang members in the United States who are getting arrested by the American government, to he's a homosexual secret Muslim laundering Qatari terrorist money. Now, there is an opposition outlet I kept getting pointed to go and find out where you can find what's been alleged and what's true, called El Faro. And El Faro does have an opposition voice, and apparently many of their journalists have had to flee the country out of fear. And Bukele's government dismisses their claims by saying that them and other people are backed by the left-wing billionaire George Soros, and therefore are controlled by Soros. Which, I mean, in the case of Alfaro, he's got a point, because if you go and look it up, left-wing Vice News, for example, list that Alfaro gets 25% of its funding from Soros's Open Society Foundation. And if you go to Alfaro's own website, they list that 65% of their funding comes from NGOs, with only 4% coming from its readers. Now, the ultimate question is whether or not this deal is worth it, getting rid of the gang staked in exchange for this new one. And most people we spoke to understood that, yeah, we don't have any civil rights. That's a downside. That's part of what's going on here. That's why we have the exception regime. And Bukele has been re-elected twice now. And if he wanted to, he could certainly stay for longer. Nothing's stopping him. The opposition's basically liquidated. There is no opposition to speak of. And he is vastly popular. In fact, 90% of the people we spoke to, even though they know that they've lost out on their civil rights, etc., they still support this new state. And for a lot of Westerners, this might be difficult to comprehend. But when I got back to the United States after the trip, I spoke to an American friend, and they described it, in their view, as Spanish Putin. For those who don't know, when Putin came to power, a lot of Russia was still run by the mafia, and that power has now been moved from them into the hands of the state. Which might seem hard to support, but if you remember what life was like before, it becomes a lot easier to understand why people might support it. For example, in El Salvador, people still do have a fear in the back of their heads of the gangs coming back. Talking to them, that's definitely something that occupies their mind. But ultimately, this is a question for Salvadorians to solve, and the best of luck to them. Because history aside, El Salvador is absolutely wonderful and can definitely be something fantastic. But that's where I'd like to leave it off. And on that note, if you'd like to support me, liking, subscribing, sharing, doesn't take you much time, means the world to me. And if you'd like to support me more financially, go over to Subscribestar, subscribe, and I'll send you over some rubles and Zimbabwe dollars when I'm back in country. Currently filming this in the United States. But otherwise, thank you to everyone who already does support me, and goodbye.